Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you kind of my field review of the new Canon EOS M5 mirrorless body from Canon. And I've been using actually a pair of these on this trip to the American Southwest state of Arizona. So good morning from beautiful, sunny Scottsdale, Arizona this morning. And this is the last day of my trip here. I've had a great time, shot in a number of different locations and got some beautiful results. But I've used two EOS M5 bodies. I've tried to use these cameras essentially as the people that buy them will. I've used primarily EFM lenses, including the new kit lens 18 to 150 millimeter. I've shot the 22 millimeter f2 on this trip, the 55 to 200 telephoto. And then also I've shot I have along the Canon 12 millimeter f2, which I'm filming with right now to include a little more of the scenery in this particular review. On top of that, I have also brought along a very common and accessible lens that I think many people will use via adapter, and that is the 50 millimeter f1.8 STM lens. And so that's the entirety of the kit that I've used while traveling on this trip. But, and I've put the M5 bodies in a variety of different situations. I've done a good bit. One of the things I love to do when I'm down in this part of the country is that I do a lot of hiking, and so I've used them a lot just for capturing desert vistas and close-ups. The nice thing about the new kit lens 18 to 150 is that it can focus in nice and close and give a 0.31 times magnification, which is very handy. And so I've used it some for that purpose, but just kind of general purpose shooting out on trails and around different places, Phoenix area, Tucson, and I've shot some like that. I got some beautiful results shooting landscapes at some other places in Arizona as well. And so obviously, as far as shooting landscapes, that's always been a strength of the M series. It's not very demanding on autofocus system, and that's been the shortcoming of the M system really from the beginning. The original M had painfully slow focus, and then a firmware update managed to significantly improve that, but not to where it was really even at the level of the competition. And the M2 wasn't really much of an improvement, and the M3 was supposed to be a major improvement, but in real-world shooting, I didn't find that it was. Fortunately, all of that has changed as we go to the M5. The M5 has inherited basically the burst rate of the 80D, and so it is now a fully functional, very versatile camera that can shoot 7 frames per second with autofocus, and without autofocus, or continuous autofocus, you can get up to 9 frames per second. And so you have a lot more in the burst there. And the raw buffer is improved. The M3 had a pretty woeful 5-frame raw buffer, which is weak by any estimation. But fortunately, I've been able to rattle off under good conditions about 22 frames before I get slowed down. And so, of course, that's just a few seconds of shooting. So you do need to time things right. But at the same time, it's certainly a very useful figure, and getting the 7 frames per second while still having tracking is certainly very useful. You need to set up the camera right for those kinds of situations, and so you need to get familiar with its settings, and just find that, make sure that you're in servo AF and you've got multi-shot there, and you may also want to be selective about how you're using the autofocus selection point type system. But overall, that burst rate and tracking works pretty well, though it's not quite at the level of say, what a good DSLR 5D Mark IV is what I'm shooting with a lot right now. It's certainly not at that level, but at a completely different level of competency when compared to previous M series bodies. And so in that sense, I think that it's really made great strides towards becoming more of a true DSLR type replacement. Kind of the torture test for autofocus is that I went to an aquarium that's opened up here in Scottsdale called the Odyssey. Aquarium type environment is a bit of a torture test anyway for autofocus. It tends to be quite dark, and so you're shooting at high ISOs, quick moving animals, and then of course curved glass surfaces and reflections just add other quirks into autofocus process. So I will say that there were a few moments that I wished I had a DSLR in my hands. I still prefer phase detect autofocus for certain situations, but overall overall, I didn't have a lot of situations where the M5 just refused to focus for me or didn't focus adequately for me. And if you set it up right, it really does pretty well even in that kind of challenging environment. And so again, not quite DSLR phase detect level, but very, very good and much, much better than what we've seen before. I don't know if I would yet call this a true action camera, but I think it's fairly close. And if you use it right, I think that you can be pleased with the results you can get for even action or sports type shooting. The challenge, of course, is putting the kind of glass in front of it that is going to be beneficial when shooting sporting type events. But overall, the autofocus has taken a huge step forward. And of course, I really, really like having the integrated EVF, which is a huge improvement. And the integrated EVF makes shooting in situations like this much easier due to being able to isolate to the sun and glare out of different kinds of settings. And thus, as a result, you get a much, it's just more field worthy. And I really, really love being able to use the Touch AF. I've dedicated it all to the right side rather than using the whole screen, and I find that that works just about perfectly for me, and it's a really, really intuitive shooting process to be able to move the looking through the viewfinder, using your thumb to move the selection point around to where you want it perfectly. You just get there much more quickly and effectively, and I feel like my autofocus results have been better for it. Of course, as we've already detailed in a previous overview of the physical controls of the M5, and if you haven't watched that episode, I'd encourage you to take a look here and check that out. But we noted that there are more dials here than ever before. In fact, in terms of external physical controls and dials, it's actually got more of those than really what Canon's DSLRs do. Of the EV value, being able to control that right from the top is very nice. And now there's a new dial function, and so that is, I haven't really used it to its full potential yet, but you know, because it's a new dial, it's not necessarily part of the intuitive process coming from I did have the M3, and it's not something that's on any of the DSLRs. But as I've learned to utilize it a little bit, there's certainly a lot of value there. And a lot of these things can be programmed to the kind of purpose that you want them for. And so there's a lot of versatility that's baked into the ergonomics of the overall design here. And overall, I really do like it. It fits nicely in the hand. As I said, it's got a great amount of physical controls. It's got, the mode selection dial is now fully featured in a way like never before. And all of that's great. The touchscreen is good with a pretty major caveat. Before on the M5, the LCD screen could be tilted up to the top, and so that you could use selfie mode or monitoring mode. Now, of course, it has been relegated to the bottom, and it doesn't seem to me to matter what I have mounted on the bottom, be it a small quick release plate, like for the Oben carbon fiber tripod that I've backpacked out into the desert here and I'm using to video from with another M5 body right now. That, even though it's a small quick release plate, it's too big to not impede the progress here. And here today, all I've got on is I'm using this cotton carrier strap shot, and so that I have a camera, ready to go when I'm ready to shoot. But even just adding on that mounting lug, and it's not all that big, but adding that to it is impeding the progress of the screen. And so in perfect conditions, you can tilt that all the way down to the bottom and have a kind of a selfie monitoring mode. But in real world shooting, it's not really all that beneficial. And the main reason is that there's just too many things that impede it. And even if you did manage to have a tiny, tiny little tripod type mount thing there, and you could rotate it down, unless you're using some kind of accessory to go off to your tripod on the side, like a 2-camera mount system, you're going to still end up with a problem in that the tripod itself is going to obscure a good part of the screen. So bottom line is that Canon really should have invested in, and I realize it would have taken some engineering work, but I do think that in future versions of the M series, they're going to have to do that engineering work and go to a fully articulating screen like what the 80D has, and so that screen can rotate out to the side, because that's really the only unobstructed place that's left here in the real estate of the camera. And so that is a bit of a fail, in my opinion. Image quality, bottom line, has always been a strength of the M series. And the advantage here is that you're getting the improved dynamic range of the 80D, and so it was a huge step forward. You're also getting a higher ISO performance, and we'll break down that ISO performance in a separate segment. This is more of a field, not so much of a lab type test. The bottom line is that Canon was confident enough in the M5 that they elected to go 2/3 stop higher in the ISO range than the 80D. The 80D topped out at ISO 16,000, while the M5 will go all the way up to ISO 25,600. So bottom line is that they did feel more confident there. At ISO 16,000, it's certainly cleaner than what the 80D is. Now, beyond that, I feel like that advantage is pretty swiftly lost. But if you have a tolerance and you're shooting in a situation where you can handle a little more grain, then I think that you can use it. And I've gone ahead and I've set the maximum ISO range when shooting auto ISO. I've moved it all the way up to the maximum, because there are settings when I'm going to be shooting in extreme dark that I'd rather get an adequately exposed picture than to get an underexposed picture or to get motion blur from my subjects. And so it's good enough, bottom line, and certainly an improvement over previous generations. It's a 24.2 megapixel sensor, so lots of detail, lots of information, and this is as big as what Canon has gone with APS-C sensors, and so as a result you can get highly detailed landscape type images. You shoot with the right glass, you shoot with the right aperture, you can load a ton of detail into the sensor. One other thing on the image quality that I do want to highlight is that on the M3, it exhibited kind of a couple of weird quirks that really set the camera back, in my opinion. One of those quirks was in certain situations you could get a weird kind of greenish color cast, particularly towards the edges of the frame. I'm very happy to report that I've watched very carefully for that with the M5, and I haven't seen it. So that's one off the checkbox. The other thing is when you were wanting to shoot HDR type settings or just trying to bracket exposures for other reasons, on the M3 it had a weird regression from the M1 and the M2 that it would slow down to an incredibly slow, like 1 frame per second burst rate. And so if you're trying to handhold HDR, which I often do, it was a serious impediment. Between getting camera movement or getting subject movement, it meant that you just weren't able to get as clean of HDR results out of the M3 unless you were using a tripod, and even then that slow burst rate, even having a tripod and a stable surface, that very slow burst rate meant that you might get more subject movement, and so it was a serious impediment. That is radically improved in the M5, and that there's no slowdown, but of course you also have a much higher burst rate, and so you're able to drill off a 3-second bracketed exposure, you know, depending on your shutter settings, but you're able to do that in a half second or less, and so it's really fantastic. The other thing that they've implemented into the M5 is an Embody image stabilization system. Now this is for video only at this point. I don't know whether they'll try to expand into adding that for stills in the future. That would be a huge benefit, obviously. But right now it is for video only. But the cool thing about Canon system is that it's designed, say, with the new kit 18 to 150 millimeter lens, which, by the way, you know, always huge zoom range lenses, they have their flaws, but this one is a pretty competent one and delivers some pretty fantastic results. But that aside, it's designed to where it will actually work. The Embody image stabilization is designed to work in conjunction with the lens image stabilization. And as a result, for video work, you can really get some fairly incredible results for panning shots, handheld shots that, you know, they may not be up to the level like I have the Zhiyuan crane, you know, motorized handheld gimbal, and that's fantastic for getting smooth video. And so obviously it's not quite at the level of that, but it's amazing how smooth of video results you can get. And you'll see some various handheld panning type shots that I've done using that combination. And so that's certainly also a nice step forward for that. Screen resolution has been improved a bit. It's now a very nice and crisp screen. Touchscreen aspect, of course, is really great. The touchscreen, Canon touchscreens are so useful in so many ways. I haven't really felt impeded on this trip, and I've shot a lot of different things. I've shot a few portrait sessions while I was here. I've shot some events while I was here, and yes, shooting with a lens like this in event setting it's slow. I mean, it gets by about 60 millimeters, it's already to f6.3. And so it's a very slow lens in terms of getting light into it. And so you're going to be shooting at higher ISO settings in a lot of situations. And so I've just had to accept that limitation as, compared to my usual kit, with big aperture lenses and DSLRs. But at the same time, again, the improved autofocus and improved sensor performance means that I've been able to get good and clean results in those settings. It's a light replacement for a DSLR system. And now between the combination of the controls and the image quality, the autofocus system, it's really getting to the place where I think for many people, Canon has finally developed a serious alternative to a DSLR in a way that none of the Embodies previously have been. Now, there's still some relative merits to compare when you're talking about, say, a Sony a6300 or a6500, in that while they're behind in the ergonomics, at the same time, Sony has it has even higher burst rates, it's got better buffer size, and of course, bottom line for a lot of people is that it has a fully fledged 4K implementation. And in the a6500, they've even solved the overheating problem to where the camera still gets hot, but it doesn't shut down. And so I think that if you want to shoot 4K, obviously the M5 it doesn't have 4K, and nothing's going to change that. But if 1080p is enough for you, and or you're primarily a still shooter that likes to shoot some video on the side, or maybe you don't care about video at all. But if that's the case, I think that right now the M5 is really one of the best combinations of ergonomics, controls, autofocus, and image quality that you're going to find in a mirrorless body. And I regret that it does not have 4K implementation. But then again, Canon's implementation of 4K in its DSLRs has been pretty disappointing anyway. So that I'm enjoying the M5, I'm seriously considering adding one to my own kit. And I like the 18-150 well enough that I think I would probably buy that combination and get that lens and maybe drop the 18-55 and the 55-200 and have that one lens for travel type purposes or just, general purpose shooting. I'm Dustin Abbott, and I hope you've enjoyed this field review of the Canon EOS M5 and a few of my photos from beautiful Arizona. If you haven't already, you can follow me on social media, sign up for my newsletter down below, visit my website and check out the photo galleries from this. You can find my full written review, linkage in the description down below as well. And if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.